Good morning, today's daf yomi is Nedarim daf Chav Daled, Nedarim 24. We're going to start on the bottom of Chav Gimel on the base, on the bottom of 23b, 2 lines from the bottom. The Gemara had said at the beginning of our chapter of Arba Nedarim, and if you make what's called a Nidre Ziruzin, a vow of encouragement, then the vow is not, it doesn't even need She'ila, it's permitted that you can annul that vow. And the reason is, what's a Nidre Zeruzin? Where one person says 4, I'm not selling you for a penny less than 4. The other one says, I vow I'm not selling you for a penny less than 2, for not buying for a penny more than 2. They're just doing gamesmanship, and the whole vow is not going to be binding. So that's with respect to business. Then in yesterday's daf, today we learned that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says that this also works not only with respect to business, but it's also considered a nidre ziruzin if you're trying to just convince your friend to eat with you. So that's also that even if you want to try to convince your friend to eat with you, that's also considered to be a nidre ziruzin. Not even in the area of mekach or memkar or masa v'matan, but just in the area of normal friendships. The vow we would assume it's a nidre ziruzin. So, and it wouldn't be binding. So the Gemara says, well, what about what about to the Rabbanan from the opening Mishnah, which was the position of the Rabbanan? Do they agree with what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says? Also, when Rabbi Yaakov says also this, do they agree with him or not? And if you want to say, oh, they argue with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, is the law like? Is the law like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov or not? Well, why would we think the law is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov against the Chachamim? The reason why we might think the halacha is like him is because the Gemara in Eruvin, Samach Beis and Beis, tells us that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's teachings are kav v'naki, that they're kav v'naki, that they are clean, and they're few, but they're clean. Kav is 100. The commentary says 102. So he has 102 teachings in the Shas. That's what the Farshim say. And in all those cases, the law is like him. So if that's the case, why is the Gemara here worried about whether or not the halacha is like him? So because it doesn't mean the halacha is always like him. It means most of the time it's like him. And we might have thought that the Rosh explains that we might have thought that more that here the halacha is not like him, because here he's arguing not with another Tana, but he's arguing with the Chachamim. So the Rosh also brings down in the name of Rabbeinu Chananel that when we said that halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, b'kav, that's 102 cases, and so therefore maybe this is not one of those 102 cases. It's only like in 102 cases, so maybe this is not one of them. So anyway, so the Gemara goes back. So let's try and figure out if the law is like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in this case or not. Tashma, it's not. We learned in the Mishnah, we're going to, God willing, Be'ezras Hashem Yisparach, get to this in around 40 days on Samach Gimel Amud Beis, where it says, Konem she'eni nenelcha imiata no talavincha kor shalchitin ushtei chavilos shayayin. Person says, I'm taking a vow that I'm not going to benefit from you. So if you don't take this for your son, this gift that I'm offering you, which is a barrel of wheat and 2 barrels of wine, a quart of wheat, and a bushel of wheat and 2 barrels of wine. So that's like a vow similar to Nidre Zeruzin. We say the vow is not binding because even without a chacham. Because he could say, because the person who he's offering it to could say, you only want to give this to me for my honor. It's my honor to not accept the gift. And so the Gemara explains, the fact that the vow is not binding, because he could say, it's like you gave it to me. So this is my honor that you wanted to give me honor, and my honor is in not accepting the gift. Sometimes a bigger honor is to not accept the gift. And so therefore, that's why it's not bounding. But doesn't that mean but if he wouldn't have said that, it would be vow, it would be binding, even though he seems to be like a nidre zeruzim. Money. So who is the author of this Mishnah? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov If you want to say it's Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov, Nidrei Zeruzin Avi, it's a straight out case of Nidrei Zeruzin. Take this. If you don't, there's a vow against you if you don't accept my gift. So he's trying to encourage him to do it. So Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov would say it wouldn't be binding. So it must be that the Rabbanan are arguing with Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov. So the Gemara says no, that's not necessarily the case. So Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov. This is Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov. Well, if it's Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov, why do we say the only reason why it's not binding is because the person has accepted it? So he says it's like my honor. No, because Mod Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov Bahai did Nidrei Yaakov. Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov would say that this case is not Nidrei Zeruzin, that this is a vow and neder. Because you have to assume other facts here that this person, one who's trying to give him the gift, has already received something from him. So he's saying, I'm not a dog that I get something from you and you don't get anything from me. So he really intends to actually give this to the other person. It's real intentional to give it. So it says the Gemara Tashma Omer Lechavero. Again, we're trying to prove is the law like the Rabbanan or Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov, or do the Rabbanan argue? And if the Rabbanan argue, is the law like them or Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov? So the Gemara says Tashma Omer Lechavero. Konem Shatanenesli. He says, you're not going to have any, he makes a vow. He says, a conditional vow. You're not allowed to have any benefit from me. No sale of nikor, shalchitin, ushtei chaviyot shel yayin. He says, you're not allowed to have any benefit from me if you don't give to my son a kur shalchitin and 2 barrels of wine. So he says, so basically this time it's a little different. He says, not that I'm giving to your son, but you have to give to my son. If you don't give to my son a bushel of wheat and 2 barrels of wine, then under those circumstances, you can't have any benefit from me. So Rabbi Meir Omer, Rabbi Meir says, indeed, you can't have any benefit. The guy can't have any benefit unless he gives it. He says, no, Chacham say you don't even need a Chacham, you can annul the vow. He could say, you know what, I waive my rights. It's as though I received it. He basically waives his rights on behalf of his son. He says, he says, I just basically, the children are, the Ran explains that we're talking about a case where the Banim are smuchim al shulchan, or they're dependents of him, his children. And in this case, he could say, I was just trying to, I thought I needed it, but I don't need it. So under these circumstances, he can waive the vow. And so even without a chacham. So the Gemara says, but without this, but if he didn't say it's kabalti, if he wouldn't be able to say, if he wouldn't be able to say ki'ilu is kabalti, then we would say that it's actually a valid vow. Why would you need to say that according to Rebbe Elazar and Yaakov, it's a complete neder zeruzin? It's just a vow of encouragement. It must be a olav rabbanan. It must be this rabbanan upuigi, and they argue with Rebbe Elazar and Yaakov, and they say neder zeruzin is a valid vow. Gemara says no. Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov. No, we're talking about a case is that this is Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov. Even though Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov says in general that it's a nidrei zeruzin, even though Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov says that nidrei zeruzin doesn't need shelas tacham. In this case, Rebbe Elazar ben Yaakov would say that behind the nidra, Mod Rebbe Elazar behind the nidra having mishum de amar elav malka ani demanino laf atwa mehenekli. But this case is different. This case, we have to assume that the person, it's like the opposite of the previous case. The person who says you have to give me something for my son, he's saying, because I gave you so much already. And he says, I'm not a king, and I just keep giving out my largesse to people, and I get nothing in return from you. He says, Lav Malkan, I'm no king, that I can benefit to you and you don't benefit me at all. So that's why it was a real vow, it wasn't a nidrei zeruzin. So Amarei Markashisha, Breder of Chisto, Rav Hashisa Markashisha. Breder of Chista says to Rav Hashi Tashma. Again, we're trying to prove the answer to this question, and the question is, Do the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov? And if they do, is the halacha like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov or not? So the Gemara says, Tashma Nidrei own sin. We're going to learn, God willing, in the Mishnah coming up, a Chav Zayin, that there are other vows that we said at the beginning of our chapter that are not binding. And one of those vows that are not binding is Nidrei Onsin. This is where he made a vow, and due to circumstances beyond our ability to control, the vow was not able to be fulfilled. So the Mishnah explains, what's Nidrei Onsin? What's an example of this neder that's an ones? So he says to his friend, I make a vow that you have to eat with me. And then under these circumstances, he gets sick or his son gets sick, or the river stops, meaning an ones happens, some unforeseeable accident. Then we're going to say that's a nidrei onsin and the vow is not binding. But if that were not the case, neder will be a vow. But why? He's inviting his friend to come over. So money, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Zeruzin Avi. If you say it's Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, this is a case of Nidrei Zeruzin. He says if you invite your friend, it's a Nidrei Zeruzin. So it must be a Lav Rabbanan. It must be that this Mishnah that says that the vow would have been binding if it wasn't an Ones is the Rabbanan Upuigi. And they must be that they argue with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov and they say when in the case where you invite your friend, it's not a Nidrei Zeruzin. Gemara says no. All Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So it's really what we're talking about here is that this is a case of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Why? Mi savris the adre mizmana lizmina. You thought what's going on here is that the person who took the vow was the one mizmana lizmina. You thought that he was the one who issued the invitation. Ran says, I will read the Ran. Kolmar lav kisal kedesal kedaitach shamazamin. It's not like you were thinking that the one who invites the person is the one who's taking the vow. If that will be the case, that's indeed a nidrei zeruzin, just encouraging him to come. Rather, in this case, the one who was invited, he's the one who turned around and gave a vow to the one who's doing the inviting. Nadar hamizamein, meaning to say, what happened was the guy who was being invited said, I want to go to your house for a meal. He's inviting himself. And the guy says, okay. He says, no, let's do this by a vow. So he was saying, I want to make sure you really invite me. So that was what's going on here. We'll read the Gemara again. Whoa, the one who was being invited makes a vow on the one who's doing the invited. He says, invite me to your meal. In. He says, yeah, okay, fine, I'll invite you. Then he says, Neder ze'alayach. He says, make this a vow upon yourself that if you don't invite me, whatever, I can't have any benefit from you, or you can't have any benefit from me. So he tried to make it a real vow. And Vinadar, the guy makes the vow that, yeah, you're invited. But then he got sick, or his son got sick, or if the river stopped him. This is what's called the Nidrei Onsin, and the vow is not going to be binding under those circumstances. So that's the case. So it's not really a Nidrei Zeruzin because it was a real vow. So now we're going to the final case on this Amud. Tashma. Yes, sir, okay. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So more than that, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov taught Omer l'chavero, somebody who says to his friend, Koneim shani nanelacha imi ata mesarech etzli v'tocho imi pas chama v'tishtemi chos chamin. So the person says, so we say Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says even more than that, meaning to say this is clearly Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. If he says to his friend, I won't have any benefit from you. He takes a vow. If you're not my guest, and if you don't eat with me hot bread, if you don't drink with me a hot cup of water, v'hala hikbe kinegdo, and the other person was the person who was being invited didn't want to come and eat with him. So he didn't want to come and eat with him. So he makes him take this vow to try and encourage him to eat with him. This is a Nidre Zeruzin. This is almost the exact same case of that we had in our mission, that he's trying to encourage his friend. So it's clearly not the case of Mekach and Memkar. That's called the Nidre Zeruzin. And the Chachamim didn't agree with him in this case. The Chachamim didn't agree that this is a Nidre Zeruzin. So what does it mean that the Chachamim didn't agree with him? Doesn't it mean that even in all of these, the first case where he tries to invite his friend and his friend refuses to come, also he's not going to agree with him. Even in that first case, we see from here the Rabbanan are arguing with him. So we see that the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, even in the case where it's just inviting you to a meal. And so Shema Mina, Pligi Rabbanan, because it's really almost the exact same case, Shema Mina. So we're on top of Chavtan on the base, and we see from here basically the idea that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that there's Nidre Zeruzin even in a case of food, inviting somebody, but the Chachamim argue and say that's not a case of Nidre Zeruzin, and so they say that that's a real vow. What was the conclusion? How did we paskin? Pligi Rabbanan away. Is like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov that this is a Nidre Zeruzin and it doesn't need any vow to be annulled. It doesn't need Shelas Chacham to annul it. So that was the first case of our chapter of Arba Nedarim, the 4 vows that don't need Shelas Chacham. And now we learned the next Mishnah says Nidre Havai. So what's Nidre Havai? These are vows of exaggeration. Amar Konem Imlo Ra'isi B'derech Hazeh Ka'olei Mitzrayim. He says, I take a vow that I never. He says, I'll take a vow if I never saw on this path like the people went up from Egypt, meaning to say he wants to say, I'm telling you, I saw so many people. And he says, let's say this bread will be prohibited upon me unless I'm telling you, I saw a number of people went up from Egypt. There's 600,000 men. So he makes this exaggerated vow, it's way too big. Or he says, I take a vow that this is prohibited upon me unless I saw a snake that looks like an olive press. Basically, it's obviously an exaggeration. That's how the Mishnah learns it. So the Gemara says, Dana, and in this Gemara we have different girsas with the Ran. So we'll go with the printed text here, just for the case of simplicity. It's the Daf Yomi Tana. Nidre Avai Mutarin Shvuas Avai Asurin. If you make an exaggerated vow, that we're going to say is mutter. That we're going to say you don't even need Shelas Chacham. It's automatically annulled, like our Mishnah tells us. Nidre Avai Mutarin, but Shvuas Avai. But if it would be a Shvuas Avai, but if it would be an oath that's exaggerated, we're going to say under those circumstances it's going to be prohibited. So the Gemara says, Hey Chidami, what's the case of Shvuas Havai? What's the case of Shvuas Havai? What's the case of an exaggerated oath that we're going to say is prohibited? If he's going to say, I take an oath that I did not see under this path 600,000 people like those who went up from Egypt. If that's what he says, midam kamer, is he really even saying anything? He's saying nothing. If he says this expression in Will Raisi, that's an expression of a conditional. It's conditional, and so that's not an oath at all. Conditional is only valid by a neder, not by an oath. So what's the case where we learned in this brisa that the nidre havai are mitarim, but the shvuas havai are asurin? What's this case where a shvuas havai is prohibited? It can't be this exact formula. So Amar Baye, the Amar. What are we talking about? Shvua shera isi. Abai says what we're talking about is where he says an oath that I did see. like the number of people went up from Egypt, meaning to say that he's not saying the oath that I didn't see, but he's saying an oath that I did see. And so since he swore about something that's not capable of being, he's in violation of what's called the Shvuas Shav. So Amarle Rava, so Rava says to Abaye, Im Kain, if that's the case, we're talking about an oath that I did see, it's for sure you're not allowed to take such an oath. The Lamali, and if that's the case, Lamali Lamemar, why do we need to even say that this Shvuas Avai is prohibited? And furthermore, we have to be talking about a case where it's similar to a vow, and this is the opposite of it. Ella Amarava, so what is Rava saying? What are we referring to here? So Rava says, but Omer Ye Asru Peres Olam Alai B'Shvua, he says, that all the fruits of the world will be prohibited upon me with an oath, if I did not see on this path, like the people went up from Egypt. So that's the expression that he has to say it. So we're talking about a shvua that's similar to the Neder Avai, and that's what he says, that a Neder Avai is permitted and the Shvuas Avai is prohibited. According to Abaye, the oath is not at all similar to the Neder, because in the Neder Avai, he's prohibiting upon himself something by an oath, where in the Shvuas Avai, he's not prohibiting upon himself anything. He's just swearing. And so therefore, Rava has to give this example. So that's why Rava has to say, that the fruits will be prohibited to me if I didn't see this path like those who went up from Egypt. So it says Ravina to Ravashi, Amrei Ravina Ravashi, but Dilma Hai Gavra, Kina Deshum Shani Chaza. Maybe this person really did see something. Maybe he saw Kina of, maybe he saw like a whole bunch of ants or basically and he called them, these are the ones who came up from Egypt, and basically he's swearing and he wants to prohibit himself all his fruits in the world if he didn't see that amount of ants. And so therefore Shapir Mashtaba, how do we know that the oath is not valid? Maybe it's a valid oath. So Amarle, he says, no, that's not what we're referring to. He says, no, when Ravash says Ravina, if when a person takes an oath, it's the way we understand this language, and we don't assume that he's referring to ants. That's not the normal way to do it. Hold on, let me stop the recording and continue for a few more minutes.